This giant brown chasm you see here is the end result of centuries of mining in the Congo. More than 500,000 people reside in the Congolese city of Cobalt, where it holds more cobalt than the rest of the world combined. Global electric car sales tripled in just 3 years, soaring from 4% in 2020 to 14% in 2022. Projections for 2023 indicates a staggering 14 million electric vehicles sold, showcasing a remarkable 35% year-over-year growth. And it's not just EVs. Smartphones, laptops, e-bikes dominate e-commerce, ranking in billions. In the US alone, consumers shell out $14 billion on electronic gadgets. The exponential rise in global demands for electronic goods propelled by the rapidly growing electric vehicle market amplifies the crisis surrounding the cobalt supply chain, impacting the lives of Congolese people who bear the brunt of hazardous mining conditions, social economic disparities, and environmental degradation. So how did we get here?
The history of the Congo is the history of the enslavement and colonization and pillage of Africa. So the Belgians took over in 1908, and right at that period, in the southeastern corner of the country, a place called Katanga, they discovered massive mineral deposits on a scale unlike anywhere else in the world. The Belgians used the same kind of forced labor terror regime to force the population living there to mine for copper. And that copper was brought up into Western Europe. And so the economy transformed into mining.
By the time we get to World War II, uranium was critical. Overwhelming majority, the bulk of the uranium came out of the Congo. It was the Congo's uranium that made the Manhattan Project possible. And then even right up to the 21st century, where we see the advances in technologies.
And these advances in technologies are made off the backs of the Congolese people. In fact, roughly 70% of all cobalt mined in the Congo comes from one city. In order to explain how this area came to be so valuable, we need to take a step back in time. In 1960, the Congo finally broke free from Belgian rule, a significant leap towards independence. But this newfound freedom was more symbolic than anything. Just 11 days after gaining their independence, the Katanga region seceded. As a result, Congo's first democratically elected president, Patrice Lumumba, sought aid from the only place they can seek help from, the Soviet Union. But this move didn't exactly sit well with the United States, fearing their adversary gaining control over Congo's precious resources. In response, a covert alliance involving the CIA, Belgium, and influential UN figures plotted the tragic assassination of President Lumumba. The somber event still echoes in today's mining industry, where the Congolese people grapple for control, a struggle for authority and resource ownership that has evolved over time. How has this historical interference shaped the dynamics of control within the contemporary mining landscape? To get at the heart of this tug-of-war, we need to first dissect the cobalt supply chain. There are the industrial mines and the so-called artisanal mines. Industrial mining mainly uses high-tech machineries to dig up minerals on a large scale. Once these minerals are processed, they go through a smelting and refining process to separate the valuable metal from the ore. The battery manufacturers receive the material to then build the rechargeable batteries, which will eventually end up in our cell phones and electric vehicles. Artisanal mines, on the other hand, are not directly controlled by major mining companies. As the name suggests, the miners dig primarily with hand tools and bare hands. And note, between 15 to 30% of Congolese cobalt is produced by artisanal mining. Once these minerals reach the processing facilities, their origins becomes blurred, and tracing them back becomes nearly impossible. The dichotomy of cobalt's origins, be it from artisanal or industrial mining, is merely a glimpse into the complexity of this overarching issue.
So there's this laundering mechanism in this informal substrate of the mining economy that takes the child mined cobalt or the peasant mined cobalt, gives that family a few dollars for the day's work, and then sells those sacks of cobalt to the industrial mining companies.
And I mean, some of these mining concessions are the size of Los Angeles. I mean, they're absolutely vast. And the mining pits, the pits that they dig in to extract the cobalt and copper and other minerals are, I mean, they're absolutely astronomical in stage, and all of the ore gets dug out and then processed, and then the waste ore gets packed into these embankments, which are mountainous in size, and these embankments are almost like walls, like these stepped tiered walls that go up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet around the mining pit.
However, with this demand comes conflict and destruction, both on the environment and a devastating toll on those who toil in the mines.
And there is also poor working conditions and human treatment of Congolese workers by Chinese-owned mining companies.
People, including tens of thousands of children, digging with their bare hands, strips of rebar, pickaxes, shovels, to get cobalt out of the ground. And they'll fill up a sack of it, maybe 30 kilograms or 40 kilograms per sack. And they'll drag it over and they'll just be paid their few dollars for each sack. So a family of five might earn $5, $6, $7, $8 that day, and that's their collective income to eat and survive.
This certainly raises the question, how can the Congolese government let these corporations exploit their people for decades? And why hasn't anyone intervened to stop them from doing so? If we look at the last 2 decades, foreign companies, particularly those from China, have dominated the mining industry, owning 8 out of the 14 largest cobalt mines in the Congo. Just last year, China produced between 70 to 80% of the world's supply of commercial-grade refined cobalt. They also manufacture about half of the world's lithium-ion rechargeable batteries.
China cornered the global cobalt market before anyone else knew what was going on. And in 2009, they signed an agreement with the then President Joseph Kabila. They promised loans, infrastructure projects, in exchange for access to resources. And China has loans for resources agreements all across Africa, or infrastructure projects in exchange for access to resources all across Africa. But Congo was crucial. So they signed this deal in 2009 at the dawn of the lithium-ion battery revolution because they saw where the future was going. And that opened the door, and one Chinese mining company after another bought up concessions. There was a lot of corruption and bribery going to President Kabila and his family in order to close these deals. But they knew that if they throw money around, they'll get the territory they want. And so before anyone knew what was happening, they locked down the cobalt mining territory. And they have vertically integrated the supply chain. So that cobalt gets shipped to mainland China for commercial grade refining. So from dirt to battery, they have integrated the supply chain.
The corruption and near monopoly has made it even more difficult for journalists to report stories covering the mining industry. Anyone who dared to expose their corruption has lost their lives doing so.
I mean, there have been Congolese reporters who've been murdered because they have spilled the beans on corruption around cobalt mining. I had to keep all of that in mind when I was working there and try to keep as low a profile as I possibly could. We were being stopped by the police every day who were coming up with reasons to try to extract bribes from us. One point, I was with my cameraman and we were filming on the outside a Chinese-owned mining concession, and we were arrested and we were held for about 6 hours.
I tried my best with my colleagues to monitor militia movements. Were the mining police onto us? Was the local army getting curious? I had my passport in a Velcro strap on my leg at all times so that if we had to just go, I could leave everything behind.
At its core, the true cost of cobalt mine reveals itself through the plight of children, forced into the dangerous conditions, risking their lives every day to mine cobalt.
Almost every day while we were in the DRC, we were getting reports from other journalists and from our contacts on the ground, sending us images of tunnel mines that had collapsed and buried 10, 20, 30 people inside. And there were, no official rescue efforts. There was whoever happened to be in the vicinity of that collapsed mine would try and help extract survivors and then those who didn't survive.
Some parents would sit down and tell me of their children who had been buried alive in a tunnel collapse, and the torment of that parent imagining what their child's final moments were like when all that rock and dirt came collapsing on their child. You can't imagine the amount of pain that people are enduring in the Congo for cobalt, but they have to because there's no other way to survive.
Very, very well-intentioned people had set up schools to sort of lure children in the best of all ways in order to give children who worked in the mines an alternative to working in the mines. And those kids were telling us, our mum and dad say to us, if you don't work, you don't eat. You're out of the family. So if you go to school, we're not feeding you anymore because you're not contributing to the family income. I mean, it's an impossible choice.
In 2019, a landmark lawsuit sent shockwaves through the tech industry. Human rights group International Rights Advocates took a bold stand against tech giants Google, Apple, Dell, Microsoft, and Tesla. They were accused of knowingly aiding and abetting and profiting from forced labor practices in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These tech conglomerates stood accused of benefiting from tragic exploitation, representing 14 families who had lost their children in horrifying mining accidents.
After that 2019 accident, Glencore built a 45-kilometer wall around its major mining site. It was built to protect its investment inside the walls, and also to prevent artisanal miners from getting into its mining site and getting hurt.
If you look at Apple, its market cap is $2.7 trillion. Do you know what the gross domestic product of the Congolese government is? Around $55 billion, around the same as the cash that Apple has on hand. These corporations, right, dwarf the country as a whole, its inhabitants. So it wouldn't mean anything for them to settle and the case and, restore to some extent those children who have been injured, or the families that have lost children in mine.
But for consumers like us who regularly rely on these technologies, how do we move towards meaningful change? Can we eliminate cobalt altogether?
It's estimated that up to 90% of minerals production in DRC comes from artisanal miners. According to the World Bank, it ranges from 500 to 1,000 to 2 million diggers. And their activity support up to anywhere from as high as 8 to 10 million Congolese. That's about 14-16% of the total population of the Congo.
For every artisanal miner who's making $2 or $3 a day, there's 8 or 10 family members who are relying on the food that $2 or $3 can buy. Taking away cobalt mining from the hundreds of thousands of artisanal miners in the Congo, and saying this industry is too dangerous for you. We have to put all of this mining into the hands of the engineers and the big industrial companies, is going to have a catastrophic effect on the lives of millions of people in the Congo.
As we push for climate goals, let's not forget the real cost. Our drive to save our environment is hurting the Congolese and their land. The deforestation, mining, and contaminations are wreaking havoc, yet we hardly acknowledge it. It's a heartbreaking contradiction. We claim to champion sustainability while wrecking Africa's environment. The economic wheel keeps turning, powered by the exploitations of millions, making us question the value we place on human life. The ongoing disregard for African lives is a painful reminder of a darker past. While some companies promise to reduce their cobalt usage, the trajectory of demand for rechargeable batteries remain uncertain.